Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video and the next one, I'm going to be taking you through how I'm modelling and painting up my new Solar Auxilia army for games of Horus Heresy. Um, Throughout it, we're going to sort of look at all the things I'm coming up against, all the challenges I'm coming up against, the decisions I'm making, and just have a really good conversation around army painting, what it means to me and what I think it means to people when I look at comments and stuff. So I asked the Patreon for some questions, which we're going to address, throughout the videos as well. There will be recipes and whatnot in these videos, but also I just thought with the MPO coming up, that's our big competition, all the rest of it, it's a really busy time for us at the minute, and it felt like a very nice opportunity to do some work on the army and just engage with you guys, have a bit of a chat with you guys about what I think is an interesting subject, and I think a lot of you do as well. So with regards to a bit of the modelling, so I like to really deep dive when I do an army project for myself. As I do fewer and fewer of them, they become more and more important. And gaming is never going to be the primary reason that I'm creating something. For me, it's tends to start with a story. Whether that's in a novel or whether that's in one of the background books, then possibly a color scheme, things like that. And that's what gets my mind sort of going. So I was devouring, as you may have noticed the last couple of months, anything I can get to do with heresy at the minute, and particularly Solar Auxilia, and in this case Cthonia, because I've chosen to do the Cthonia Headhunters, which are kind of the main bad guy Solar Auxilia, or the loyal to Horus Solar Auxilia cohorts, one of the original sort of famous ones. And what the planet itself is sort of, it's full of gangs. That's kind of the thing. It's a mining planet, loads of gangs. So I thought, how can I represent that in the miniatures, little tweaks? So I thought, okay, I'll put some chain swords in. I can change how I do the standards, that type of thing. But I didn't just want to treat it like Lego. I didn't just want to glue bits on here, there, and everywhere. And whilst that is tons of fun, I don't get to do that very often now. So I want to make sure that the army looks as cohesive and polished as I possibly can. So, for instance, the reason I'm going to all this effort to just put some chainswords on my line command is because on the back of the Solar Auxilia gloves, there is a little armor plate. And if I had just used the hand from the chainsaw, which I got from a Imperial Guard kit, it wouldn't have that. So there wouldn't be that sort of design consistency across the miniatures. So I would like them to look like they are meant to be on there. And it's kind of nice having that slightly more ornate hilt on there as well, I think. So quite a bit of work, but what I have done is deliberately kept all my troops very, very simple. I've glued basically no extraneous stuff on them. The sergeants in the squads have got a pistol, a holstered pistol on them, and some little grenade pouches. The line command are simply getting a chainsword and a pistol. That's all that's differentiating them. And what that's going to do is allow me to use already existing bits that we've got on the sprues when I come to create the higher levels of command sort of echelons, and they will automatically stand out without me having to do tons more work. Also, as much as I would love to have put the bayonets on them because I think they look fantastic, there is no chance that those things are surviving me gaming with these miniatures whatsoever. The amount of times I've dropped these models already, and they're not even fully painted yet. So yeah, super cool, but it's just not gonna work. And I guess that brings me on to, I suppose, the overarching theme of what I wanted to talk about is army painting is, I believe, different for everybody. Even myself, 10 years ago, the kind of armies that I was wanting to paint, I was capable of painting, I desired to paint, are completely different to the ones that I want to do now. And I don't just mean my tastes have changed, I mean that my situation has changed. 10 years old, 10 year younger me had many different, responsibilities to the ones I currently do. So the pressure and the joy and the reasons to create armies now are different. And for myself, it will very rarely ever be gaming driven, which means that I need to enjoy every process of it, including the end result, but particularly the processes themselves. And this is where I think things like speed painting and the pressures that seem to be put on us when we look at social media or we look at YouTube and things like that, and we're just getting bombarded with, paint this super quick, cheats, gimmicks, or they don't say gimmicks, do they? But they'll sort of, this is cheating, this is speedy ways of doing this. They're fantastic gimmicks and techniques and fun ways of colouring in the models, but it's not the only way of painting, right? And I worry that there is this pressure or this expectation for hobbyists to knock out great looking armies. You know, if I was able to spend X amount of hours every day dedicated to army painting, you know, as I have been able to in the past, you can produce something very different, you know, on a very different scale to what you can produce when you have perhaps a few hours a week to do some army painting. So I think, you know, going in with the right expectations of a project are key. And all of this I'm talking about is just my personal opinion and experiences. And as a caveat, I know everybody's are different. But I do feel like we've got to a point now with the channel, with all of you that sort of engage with it, that, you know, we can talk about these kinds of things. And you know, on the Discord, it's really great to see all the conversations going on there and stuff. And I think, you know, miniatures painting is, as a hobby, is so different, even to say 5 years ago, but particularly to say 10 years ago, so different. So I'm working on 70 infantry here at one time. I wanted to break the back of the normal troops. From what I can gather, they're absolute bobbins in the game. They will die to a stiff breeze, but it doesn't matter. I'm collecting Solar Auxilia here. I want my future Napoleonics, you know, looking army. So I want about 100 just normal, you know, sort of rifle troops. So I have to figure out, right, how do I make them look good? But one of the reasons I've decided to do them first is because once you've got these out the way, I will have zero fear of doing anything else for this army, because nothing is going to be as much of a drag or as a repetitive, you know, drag makes it sound like I haven't enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed colouring these things in. It's given me tons of time to think. I've listened to so many flipping podcasts, things, you know, a lot of old world podcasts, to be fair, at the moment, but that's for some later videos. And so it has been enjoyable. But anyway, I'm waffling. There's probably a lot of waffling in this video. Big brushes. That was my point. Use big brushes to get through these troops. And one of the fun things with that is we're going to have a brush set coming out soon. So we've been trying for a few years now using the different AO brushes, and they approached us and said, you want to do like a signature brush set? So we said, yeah, we do. So I'll talk about that at a later date, but it felt like these arrived in the post while I was painting. So it felt like a nice thing to mention. But yeah, so for me, it was figuring out, right, how can I get through this quantity of troops initially and set my expectations. And I find that, you know, you're going to run up against certain challenges, or I've run up against certain challenges that I haven't for a little while, because I've tended to be doing one-off models each week for YouTube. One of those was when you're spending umpteen hours in a sitting just painting black or just painting grey, your brushes can become pretty manky. And this isn't meant to be some like product placement or thing, whatever, you know, use whatever you want. But I found myself, rather than like I do at the end of a week cleaning brushes, I was having to sort of maintain them after a session. But all of this was meant that the actual painting itself, as simple and some might say boring as it was, I didn't find it boring, was always pleasurable, because my tools were in good condition. I used my wet palette. I kept my brushes in decent nick. You know, I'm not talking about crazy cleaning or anything like that, but just making sure that the situation I was in was comfortable. You know, I had my lighting set up. I had my chair set up well. I had either music on or I had podcasts on. I'm not someone who can watch films and things when they paint. Like Andy loves watching like old reruns of you know, old TV shows and things like that. I can't do that. I like to either nothing at all, just my thoughts, or some music and podcasts. But you know, making sure that it was a relaxing place to be, so that I could get through this thing. And I suppose my point with this initial waffle here is, if you want a big army, an impressive looking army, which is what I want with this, I want this to be considered a really cool Cthonian Headhunters army. I want people to go, oh yeah, have you seen that one, you know, Henry's done? Because I'd like to produce that brings me joy by doing that, not necessarily on social media and stuff, but amongst my friends, amongst the events I go to. If you want that army, you have to put the work in. There are no shortcuts. If you want a good looking, whatever that means to you, right? If you want something that is satisfying, that you are really pleased and proud of the end result, not just because you got it done quickly, you have to be, or I have to be aware that it's going to take some time to get there. And for me, breaking the back of the large portion of troops first made the most sense. I know Andy's really struggled with this in the last few years. We've talked about it. Just, it's what do you really want out of the project? And it's not a case of not being willing to do the work, but it's at this stage saying, is it worth it? Is the end result actually worth it? Do I need another army? And actually, I found myself saying, well, no, I don't. There's a few that I really want. And this is one of them. This may well be my last heresy army I ever do. So I want to make sure it's a good one. I want to make sure it's one that's 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 sort of enjoyment and pride at the end of it. But I want it to be an army. I want it to be one that gets done. I don't want it to take 3 years. I need it to only take a couple of months at most to get, a really good chunk of it done, to keep that motivation going, to get that positive feedback going, in my head, from what I'm achieving. So to me at the moment, that's what army painting sort of means. So I think in this first video, we'll talk more about the overall sort of theory of the army painting, and then next week we'll get into perhaps the more nitty gritty, sort of specific, paint application, different tools, different techniques, things like that. I think, given all the questions that the patrons put, I think that's probably the best way to approach it. And I'll apologise now, however many minutes in we are. This may come across as incredibly self-indulgent, and I'm sorry if it does. But as I say, I feel we've got to a point where it would be good to start having a bit more conversations rather than just, recipes after recipes. And yeah, that's so. Let me know. Let me know what you think. If you like it, if you don't like it, whatever. We'll see how we get on with it. But I'm not going to answer all of the questions that the patrons have put in here. But what we're going to start doing is just some live stream Q&As for the Patreon, because I think it's a lovely community to be part of, and that's all down to everyone that's supporting us on it. And I'd like to start having a little bit more direct sort of interaction with everyone on there, because it motivates me, it excites me, it encourages me to analyze and consider what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and just sort of look at different opinions and listen to them. Because quite frankly, because it's interesting, I think, and so far has been a very pleasant sort of place to be, the Discord and the Patreon. So yeah, I'd like to embrace that a little bit more. But we'll talk about some of those questions, as I say, that have come up in this initial sort of army painting thing that I threw out. So yeah, oh gosh, where on earth do we start? First up, Alan's asked, what's the future for paint models, paints, all the rest of it? Masterclass classes. So classes will be coming back. We've got a few in June that sold out now, but we'll be coming back as of September. We'll be back doing our sort of regular monthly classes all over the place, whether that's over the UK or the rest of the world. Cult of Paint's still a very small, company. There's only a handful of us involved in it, and we don't want to half-arse anything. So when we are working on something new, we would rather pull back on other elements of the business to ensure that whatever we're doing gets our full attention. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but it means that we can be sort of proud of whatever we put out. And recently that's been working on the paint range a lot. That's taken up a lot of our time, while still trying to make sure we do videos on YouTube and videos on Patreon each week. We've had a model range now sat around for far too long. The sort of second season of Deagard. So that will be coming out soon as well. So the paint range should be out very soon. Hopefully we can announce something. I love that at the MPO, and of course the MPO, our first in-person show, which we want to be around for a long time. So one of the things we decided to cut back on was classes for the first sort of 6 months or so of the year, just so we had a bit more time and energy to put into the other things. But we miss them, and we'll be getting back to them as soon as we can. So thanks, Alan. Quite a few people have sort of asked about, how do you not get bogged down? How do I approach painting a big army? And again, I think it has to go back to whatever gets you through painting the army, whatever gets it finished is the right thing for you to do. And for me, I say on this army, it was to break the back of it and have a massive, great chunk of troops. As useless as they might be, it would be something I'd never done before. I've never had an Imperial Guard army. And I know this is an Imperial Guard, but I've never had a sort of basic human sci-fi army. So it's incredibly exciting. And what I want is humans. Yes, the Lehman Russ I did the other week was wonderful. it was far easier and quicker to do than these guys, and will stand out much more, in the collection. But for it to stand out, it needs to have these basic troops to sit alongside. So I say getting them done for me was an opportunity to break the back of what's potentially the most boring part of the army and take any fear out of anything else I'm going to be doing for the project. It will all be easier or more enjoyable, or however you want to put it, than painting these 70 odd infantry up. So that was my decision for doing the infantry first. So yeah, I think although I'm working on 70, as the stages of the miniature of the paint job get towards the end, I will break that down and be working on them in 10s and 5s and singles. You've seen earlier, I just have them all out on a tray, and I have 10 corks with blue tack on the top, and that's how I like to work. There's great miniatures holders out there that work for people, but for me, it's still champagne style cork, 2-penny piece glued to the bottom for a bit of weight, and then a big blob of blue tack on top, and it's just what works for me. Some of these miniatures holder things are beautiful things, some of the turned wood ones and stuff, but it's just not for me. It'd be wasted on me. I'm quite a messy painter, as you probably noticed in some of the videos. So yeah, that's how I do it. So I have 10 corks, so I work on 10 at a time, pop them off, pop the new ones on, do that stage on the 10, and that's how I work. Certainly when I used to do a lot of commission painting, that's how I tended to do it. I would do sort of all the airbrushing. I'd build the whole army, do all the airbrushing, and then start working on the things in 10s, because that's how I found I was getting keeping my motivation up. And I think that's the thing. There's tons of products out there. There's tons of tutorials out there. There's tons of ways of painting, right? Generally, it's just find the people you jive with, right? That's who you listen to or read, and that's the stuff that's going to help you out. But when it comes to the actual getting the army done, that's a far more of a psychological thing, right? And it's something I don't understand, and I'm trying to understand more of by talking to people and listening to people, and really, yeah, let's get that discussion going on. Not, how'd you get that on? What silver did you use for dry brushing? That's not going to help you get your army done, right? There's everyone's got a favourite one, and if you like a painter and what they suggest, maybe go and try that one out. But what's going to help you get the army done is people's, I think, those psychological things, right? Those organisational techniques, the way to approach it that might be different to what you've done sort of in the past. And I think lots of self-reflection, which is why, for instance, I keep a notebook for every project. It not only has, the stages, the paints I use, the dilutions, all that sort of thing, but it might have little tips in there that I say to myself, I've tried a different way of, oh gosh, I don't know, a different order of doing things. Or for instance, for these guys, I have painted these completely differently to how I did the video a few weeks ago. That's not to say I don't think the way I did it a few weeks ago isn't a really good way of doing them. It's just that for me was the bare minimum. I wanted to take them a few steps further, and that meant effectively changing the entire process and an entire scheme. So I will put the full method through in the next video when they're done. But for instance, I think you have to be willing to adapt mid-project. Yes, you do a tester. That's great. Maybe you do a couple. But even when I was stuck in, I suddenly realised I clipped off all the heads and all the shoulder pads to do separately, because I thought I was going to airbrush them with this clear red and all the rest of it. And I changed how I was airbrushing the main troops because I was going to airbrush the fatigues, because I felt that was the most efficient use of the airbrush, because the rest I was just painting flat black. So I could do that with a paintbrush. And it was time consuming. Absolutely, it was time consuming. But I think it was slightly less time consuming than if I had hand painted the fatigues, and that's to do with the coverage of the grey paints. But then I'm sort of sat looking at these baggies of heads and shoulder pads, and I'm thinking, my God, it's going to take me absolutely forever just individually doing all of those. So it will take me forever doing them for this batch of 70. But I've changed how I'm going to paint them, which means that all the ones I do in the future in the army will take me much less time. So I'm not going to airbrush them. I'm going to glue them on the model and paint them with a paintbrush on the model, because I think it will be quicker than all the faffing with doing them separately. And that's something I've had to learn as I'm doing the project. I've painted tens of thousands of miniatures, but it's a bit different when you're doing it. You're doing it for yourself. So yeah, I think being willing to adapt even mid-project could be really important to keep to keep things moving on. Now, so quite a few of the questions do like what motivates me, what keeps me going with it, how do I see a project through? And other than what we've already chatted about, things to do like expectations stuff, it's to say I am a fan of the Warhammer universes, and it's generally Warhammer stuff that I paint armies for. I'm not particularly into historicals or anything like that, but it's the background. That's what gets me. It's usually a black library book. And then perhaps, a color plate. I know for Andy, it's often a piece of artwork. So I just obsess about it. I just find, I deep dive it. I study it, for want of a better term. So absolutely just absorb everything I can about it. And then, arrogantly or not, I set out with the intentions of when it's an army like this. So not when it's something like specifically for gaming. So a while ago, I did those Flesh Eater courts over Christmas. Super fun. I had fairly low expectations. It was incredibly fun painting them, incredibly fast. They're great for gaming. I can push them around. I have a load of fun with them. Brilliant. When the new edition comes out, I've got an army I can learn to play with whilst I spend more time painting up the Slaves to Darkness nicely. We'll talk about them in the next few weeks. But yeah, arrogantly or not, with this sort of project, I set out to go, right, I want to create my favourite version of the Chthonian Headhunters that I'll see. And currently, I haven't seen that anywhere else. So I'm like, right, I'll try and do it. And that's not to say I don't think someone else will do it better than me. But right now, I haven't seen it. So let's create it. So there is a sort of pride element to it there of wanting to try and create something. And please don't take this the wrong way, but I genuinely don't care what anyone else thinks in that sense. It has to, for me, be my favourite interpretation of that army. And then from a professional point of view, because obviously I do this for a living, it would be lovely if, and as it currently is, when I attend events or when we get feedback, it's so wonderful when people say, I followed a tutorial, I really enjoyed it, I've changed it a bit and I've got this done. Brilliant. That's why we do what we do, right? It's just to try and help people enjoy their painting a bit more, right? And in the end, thanks ever so much to our commissions chief, Ben. That's another good tip, right? Have a mate or someone to talk to about it, because it is a bit selfish. It is a bit boring sometimes just hearing someone talk about their army ideas. I think, God knows why I'm recording a video doing exactly that. But if you have a good hobby mate, or you have a good Discord channel or something like that where you can talk to and really value the opinions of the people that you're asking those questions to, I think it's brilliant. It's helped me no end. So particularly having Ben, to lean on with all this, because this is right up his street. This sort of stuff. All right, let's do a couple more questions before we consider wrapping this first part up. Because as I say, I've really no idea how this is going to go down. It might just be a case of shut up, Henry, and paint some things. We don't want to listen to all this waffle. So Kane's asked, he's always wanted an army, but he gets bogged down with the painting because he normally does display stuff. Is there a way to break it down to smaller chunks to make it more manageable? How do you balance and stop yourself going into too much detail on the painting side of things? That's a great question, and it's something I have suffered with tons in the past. And the reason I put the toughest army, or whatever I've called the video, something like that, my hardest army I've ever painted, is I am so scared and nervous that I am going to spend all this time, of which I do not have much, painting this army up. That's going to look decent under the lamp, all right in photos, and then rubbish on the shelf or on the board in normal lighting. That happened when I did the Cruel Boys army for the launch of last edition of Age of Sigmar, and it has weighed on my mind daily since, for like the last 3 years or whatever it's been. So I completely understand what you're going with there, Kate. I think you've got lots of options, right? You could potentially pick an army that is a lower model count, which would allow you to paint those miniatures to a higher standard. But there's no reason you can't paint an heavy metal standard, or whatever your equivalent to that would be stylistically, army of Solar Auxilia. Again, it goes back to their expectations. If you want that, it's going to take you a long time. So how much do you want it? I think that's the biggie, right? Why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it because you're meant to have an army, because that's expected of you in this hobby? I don't know. There are so many more challenges now for hobbyists than there were, sort of, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There's so much, it feels like there's a lot more external pressure on what it is you should be doing as a hobbyist. You have all these, I say, all these influencers, all these, whatever, telling you how to paint. This is the best. That's terrible. I imagine it must be incredibly overwhelming if you're not a fairly driven, sort of self-confident person when it comes to it. But yeah, how do I stop myself painting too much detail? Just be strict. Discipline. I think discipline is probably the number one tip for army painting is having discipline. So if I say to myself, right, things get one tippy-tap edge highlight, that's it. That's all they're getting. And if on Trooper 53, I get a tiny bit of paint where it shouldn't be, or I notice a mold line that I might have missed in the cleanup stage, it just doesn't matter. Move on. In the grand scheme of it, those things do not matter anywhere near as much as getting this thing done. And if that'll derail you, you can't be spending time on those sorts of things. I'm not saying being lazy. I'm not saying rush things. I'm saying be willing. And again, all of this is from me. I don't want to be preachy here. This is what's going on in my head when I'm doing it. But I must be willing to cut myself some slack, let the odd thing go, because it just doesn't matter in the overall scheme of it. It's just, don't be too hard on yourself. Solar Auxilia, powders, plan a great looking army. Yeah, I think I've kind of spoken about the conceptualization phase of the army. Gaming, as I say, doesn't have a huge impact for me, but as Steve has said in his comment, he quite likes to use the rules as a framework to build an army from. I think I'm exactly the same as you, Steve. Like, the idea is this is predominantly a shelf army, but also it's an army I'm going to play against, probably mainly my buddy Dan, who is also doing a solar army. He's doing a loyalist, or an Imperium loyalist Ultramarines solar force. So all the people that keep telling me that solar are absolutely useless and they'll die to a stiff breeze and battle cannons are AP4, which is useless against Marines, doesn't matter, because me and Dan are going to line up our hundreds of troops and walk them towards each other and roll buckets of dice and drink lots of tea and have a wonderful time. So again, it's that, what do you want from this? What do you want from it all? How do you combat fatigue when painting loads and loads of minis in the same scheme? So that's 3Gs has asked that. As I said, I think it's comfort. If the desk is a place that you want to be, this is a hobby, right? Doesn't mean you haven't got to put work in. It's a hobby. It should be a place to go and relax, and whether it's meditative or whatever it is for you, make the place, for me anyway, make that place that you're doing it a happy place to be. And if you've got to go and sit there and paint 70 pairs of black boots, well, fine. Listen to some new albums, stick a podcast on, do whatever, and just enjoy it. And I say, for me, it's a lot of it's acceptance. It's, if I want this to look how I want it to look in my head, I'm going to have to put the work in. But it will pay off, because to me, it's worth having that army. There's other armies that haven't. There's other armies that I've started and failed, as I'm sure we all have, that I won't do again. I won't bother restarting. But things like the Slaves to Darkness that I tried 18 months or so ago and didn't come out, that's getting done, because that's something I want to do. It's something I'm driven to do, but I have to sit and analyze why it didn't happen and how I can make that happen, because it's worth it to me, to get that done. Matt asking about the paint range again. Okay, very, very soon. I say, should be. They are normal paints. They're just good paints, great colors, simple as that. Our intention is it's where you can sort of build your painting collection from. There's not millions of them. They're not weird to use. They're in dropper bowls. They're just good paints, great colors. Yeah, happy painting. How do I break up into manageable chunks? I think I've kind of covered that one. I don't initially, and then get smaller and smaller as we go along. David's asked about sort of little bits of kit that I use. Again, I think I'll talk more about that in the next video. We'll talk about, brushes, graphite pencils, working with the pigments, all those sort of things that help to get it done. How do you paint trim on Marines and not go insane? You don't, Chris. You just do, and you accept. And when you see someone else who's painted a Marine army with loads of trim on it, you just give them that nod as you walk past each other. That's all it is. Oh yeah, Leon's asked a really interesting one. How do you look about evoking atmosphere and drama in an army project? It's a brilliant way of putting it. I'm not sure I can articulate that exactly, if I'm honest. But I think it's, as I said, by letting a project consume me and surround myself with the stories, with the artwork, with the ideas, even things that are even vaguely adjacent. You know, so I read everything I could on the Sons of Horus and stuff as well, just to try and get an idea of Cthonia, what it was, what would the people be like that come from this planet, and how could I represent them in these miniatures. It to me, it came from there. So it wasn't a deliberate stylistic approach to try and evoke atmosphere. And again, if you're looking to talk about atmosphere and things in miniatures, please go and check out Massive Voodoo blogspot. Roman Lapat, he's got a channel over here on YouTube as well now. He just gets so much atmosphere into his miniatures. They're remarkable. They're wonderful. They're a huge inspiration to me. So yeah, you know, if you don't know who that is, go and check them out. Because yeah, they're really, really wonderful. But no, so I think the atmosphere for me is created more by, I suppose, not method acting, but you know what I mean if I say that. I just get really into the project. So, you know, I think to myself, right, what would they arm themselves with? You know, how would they consider, you know, the reason my basic troops don't get much is not just because it means my HQs and stuff will stand out more, but it's because I don't think they deserve it. Why should they get anything decent? They're not. They're just mooks, right? Here's your rifle, off you go, and be done with it. And someone asked earlier actually about, do I paint HQ and stuff differently? Typically, I didn't used to do that. I used to let the models do the work for me, and I painted every model in my army to the same level. I think I'm going to change that up a little bit with this project. Not drastically. I think I am going to take a little bit more time on some of the character miniatures in this army, simply because it is kind of a horde army, right? So there will be very obvious focal points, centerpieces. Whereas traditionally, I've done a lot of armies that have tended to perhaps be more on the side of slightly more elite, where almost every model is a hero. So I haven't found the need to spend any more time on the actual sort of HQ models and things like that. Whereas this, you know, I think the power of a 30-man las rifle blob is looking at that 30-man las rifle blob. If I paint them all to the nth degree, I don't think that's going to have significantly more impact on how you view them. One, viewed on their own, it will, but they're not meant to be viewed on their own, whereas the HQ models sort of will be. So yeah, I think that's probably enough for this video. As I say, the second part of this will be me completing all of these las rifles, hopefully adding in a sentinel or two if I have the time, and I'll include the full recipe in that. And I'll talk about perhaps little things to do with more with products and the painting, which we'll do next week. And then after that, we'll be jumping back into more traditional sort of recipe army painting type videos for a bit. We've got the MPO in about 10 days' time. Once that's done, as I say, I'll be a lot less stressed and ready to do some bit more headspace to do random things every single week, if that's what you guys want. If you'd rather we do sort of 3-4 week projects, then do let me know in the comments, because I'm very up for that. As well. And those of you that keep asking about the Black Templars, they haven't gone anywhere. We're going to absolutely be continuing with them. It's just we want to do them when we feel like it, and we're motivated and we love to do them. So when an idea comes up, we will do it and keep that army going. And I think I want to do something else for that Deathwing project as well. But anyway, it's going to be a summer of fantasy, I suspect, given the old world love and the new edition of AOS as well. So, but anyway, for the time being, let's get all these solar things done. So, anything you want to ask me, pop down in the comments. I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you ever so much for your ongoing support, both here with the likes and subscribes and over on Patreon. It means a massive amount to myself and Andy and the rest of the team. Without you, we couldn't do it. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Take care. I'll see you next time.